Some intriguing news has surfaced as the Las Vegas Raiders have officially signed linebacker Devin White to a one-year deal. This is an exciting move, and there's a lot to unpack about what this means for the Raiders moving forward. Plus, we have some inside information from none other than Raiders general manager John Spytek. Let's dive deep in. What's up, buddies? Welcome back. If you are new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We cover all AFC West news here on this channel. As many of you know, the Raiders were actively searching for a linebacker. Initially, they made a substantial offer to Christian Ellis, reportedly close to $7 million a year. Ellis, while not yet proven, was seen as a player with significant potential and a strong fit for the team's scheme. However, the New England Patriots weren't about to let him go so easily. They had placed a right of first refusal tender on Ellis, meaning they could match any offer made by another team, and they did exactly that. The Patriots retained Ellis, leaving the Raiders to pivot and reassess their options at linebacker. Clearly, the Raiders weren't satisfied with their current linebacker group. Pete Carroll's defensive scheme thrives on aggressive, physical players, often favoring size and power over speed. Several players have already been brought in to fit this mold, including Elandon Roberts from Pittsburgh, known for his violent hands, and Jeremy Chinn, a physical force who isn't afraid to deliver crushing hits. Additionally, Isaiah Pola-Mao, who was with the team last season, exemplifies this style of play and was an early signing in the offseason. Now, with Devin White joining the roster, the Raiders add another player who embodies this aggressive approach. Although White is entering his 6th or 7th season in the league and isn't a fresh face, his physicality remains a standout trait. Over his career, White has proven to be a tough, dependable linebacker. While his most recent season with the Houston Texans wasn't his best, his 5 seasons prior with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were highly productive. White averaged close to 100 tackles per season, including standout years with 140, 128, and 124 combined tackles. Additionally, he's an effective blitzer, amassing 23 career sacks, along with 9 fumble recoveries and 6 forced fumbles. Devin White brings a hard-hitting, physical presence that aligns perfectly with Pete Carroll's defensive philosophy. His experience and skill set should provide a boost to the Raiders' defense as they look to solidify their linebacker cores. Let's not overlook how Pete Carroll's scheming is going to bring a fresh dynamic to the Raiders' defense this year. While Patrick Graham remains the defensive coordinator, I see Carroll's influence shaping the strategy significantly. Expect to see a lot of that classic Carroll cover 3 defense, reminiscent of the Legion of Boom days. It's clear the Raiders are blending their existing framework with proven concepts from Carroll's successful tenure in Seattle. What's also interesting is how Carroll seems to have evolved in his approach. Back in the early 2000s and 10s, he had immense success with a mix of experienced players and younger talent. However, in the later part of the decade, Seattle leaned heavily on rookies and unproven players, and the results didn't quite measure up. They couldn't return to being a top 5 defense. With the Raiders, though, it's evident they're prioritizing veterans. Players with a track record, even if they're in their 6th or 7th year and slightly past their prime. This signing of Devin White is a great example of that strategy. It's a 1-year contract, as reported by Jordan Schultz, which makes it a low-risk, high-reward move. White brings experience, physicality, and the kind of mentality that fits perfectly into this evolving defensive scheme. Personally, I think it's a smart pickup for the Raiders, but I want to hear your thoughts as well. What do you think about Devin White joining the Raiders? Share your opinions in the comments below. Switching gears a bit, there's also been a lot of buzz around the Raiders general manager John Spytek. He recently gave an interview where he touched on several topics, including the decision-making process behind the team's moves this offseason. One of the standout discussions was about Geno Smith and the factors that led to his acquisition. Spytek emphasized that the team's approach has been to leave no stone unturned, particularly at the quarterback position. They've made it a point to explore every potential option in player movement. The connection between Coach Carroll and Geno Smith from their time in Seattle played a significant role in the decision. Geno had his best years under Carroll, and his familiarity with the coach's system was a huge advantage. Spytek highlighted Geno's skill set, praising his ability to throw the football at all levels, whether it's deep shots, intermediate throws, or short passes. His touch, arm strength, and consistency stood out. And when you have someone like Pete Carroll in your corner, vouching for Geno as a player, competitor, and leader, it's an endorsement you can't ignore. The insight Carroll brought to the table was something Spytek mentioned other teams wouldn't have access to. It's a unique perspective that helped shape this move, and it's exciting to think about what Geno Smith could bring to the Raiders under Carroll's guidance. As the Raiders evaluated their options in free agency and considered players available via trade, they ultimately landed on Geno Smith as the right fit. According to John Spytek, this decision wasn't made lightly. After thorough analysis, it became clear that bringing in Geno provided a much-needed upgrade at quarterback. From a draft capital perspective, the cost was reasonable. A late third-round pick for a player who could potentially be the team's starting quarterback for years to come. For Spytek, who values draft picks highly, This trade made too much sense to pass up. He expressed excitement about Geno's arrival and is eager to see how he can contribute to the offense. This move, in many ways, reflects the team's commitment to exploring every possible option to improve. As Spytek and Pete Carroll emphasized, no stone was left unturned in their search for the right quarterback. Let's face it, the Raiders' quarterback situation last season was far from ideal. In comparison to a player like Patrick Mahomes, the gap was enormous. While Geno Smith isn't on Mahomes' level, he represents a step in the right direction, a tangible improvement that brings the team closer to competing at a higher level. It's important to note that aiming for a complete overhaul at quarterback through the draft doesn't always guarantee success. Sometimes the better approach is to bring in a veteran with proven potential and a solid foundation, even if they're not a top 5 quarterback. Players like Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, or even Rich Gannon from past years represent this kind of strategy. The idea is to gradually improve the position while continuing to build the rest of the team. This approach makes sense for the Raiders. Geno Smith offers stability, experience, and the potential to elevate the offense. It's not about making an immediate leap to elite status. It's about getting better and setting the foundation for long-term success. For the Raiders, this approach makes perfect sense. John Spytek pointed out that Pete Carroll is not the type of coach who wants to wait around and focus solely on long-term rebuilding. Carroll is all about winning now, and his philosophy aligns perfectly with the team's current strategy. This was evident from the outset, as both Spytek and Carroll hinted at this mindset during their introductory press conferences. What's refreshing is that the Raiders are actually following through with that plan. They're not just talking about competing, they're taking active steps to improve and win games. Spytek's explanation of the Geno Smith trade highlights just how intentional this process has been. Now, let's talk about the draft pick involved in this trade. The Raiders didn't give up a high third-round pick like the 73rd overall. Instead, it was a much lower selection, the 92nd overall pick, which originally came from the Jets, who had received it from the Lions. So, essentially, the Raiders are parting with a bottom-of-the-third-round pick for a starting-caliber quarterback. When you break it down like that, it's hard not to see the value in this move. Getting a proven quarterback for that price is a calculated decision. Geno Smith might not be an elite quarterback, but he's a good one. Player capable of elevating the offense and bringing stability to a critical position. It's the kind of move that can help the team stay competitive while continuing to build for the future. Spytek also brought up an interesting point that's worth considering. He explained how having Pete Carroll's insight made this trade even more valuable. When Spytek was with the Buccaneers, they wouldn't have had access to the same level of detail about Geno Smith. Is he smart? Can he process complex schemes? Can you layer concepts onto the offense, and will he grasp them? These are crucial questions for any quarterback acquisition, and having Carroll's first-hand knowledge provided answers that other teams wouldn't have had. This level of insight made the decision much easier. It's one thing to look at a player's stats or game tape, but it's another to have a coach who's worked directly with the player and can vouch for their intelligence, adaptability, and overall fit within a system. For the Raiders, this makes Geno a solid option moving forward. He's a capable quarterback, not an elite one, but someone who can bring stability to the position. Sure, Geno hasn't reached the pinnacle of success in the league, and his performance over the last 3 years has slightly declined, but the hope is that, under Pete Carroll's guidance, he can find his groove again. As the Raiders continue to shape their roster, their focus isn't solely on immediate success, but also on building for the future. That's where the draft comes into play. Recently, John Spytek was spotted at Boise State's Pro Day, likely scouting players, including Ashton Jeanty. The team even took Jeanty out to dinner, which shows they're interested in learning more about him. Not just his on-field skills, but also his mindset and fit within their culture. These steps indicate the Raiders are leaving no stone unturned as they aim to construct a team capable of competing at a high level. With a mix of veteran additions like Geno Smith and the potential infusion of young talent from the draft, they're setting themselves up to make meaningful progress. The Raiders running backs coach was also present during the meeting with Ashton Jeanty, which signals that they're seriously evaluating him as a potential draft pick. Whether it's Jeanty or another player, the Raiders have a chance to bolster their offense in the draft. They might go for a right tackle, which would provide solid protection for Geno Smith. If not, perhaps they'll target a wide receiver. Names like Tetairoa McMillan or Kyle Williams come to mind. Whatever direction they choose, it's clear the focus is on getting better offensively. Adding the right pieces around Geno Smith will only enhance his performance. John Spytek also touched on the defense, particularly the importance of building a strong defensive line. While he didn't dive too deep into the details, he made a solid point. Having a dominant defensive line is crucial, especially in a division stacked with talented quarterbacks. Bringing back players like Adam Butler and Malcolm Kuntz strengthens that unit. If the defensive line can consistently pressure opposing quarterbacks, it'll make life much tougher for teams like the Chiefs or Chargers. The Raiders seem to be on the right track overall. They haven't splashed out for big-name free agents, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The foundation of any successful team is a strong draft. This is where they can find difference makers, whether on the offensive line, defensive line, or at skill positions. With 6 or 7 picks in their pocket, they have a golden opportunity to bring in game changers who can shape the team's future. And speaking of shaping the team, Max Crosby had some high praise for Jackson Powers Johnson, the Raiders' starting center. Crosby didn't want to oversell it just yet, but his words carried weight. Here's what he had to say. "I'm not giving him all his flowers yet. I don't want to get too excited, but Jackson Powers Johnson has been working hard. He's been with me for most of the offseason, pushing himself, and I've been on him constantly. He's already talented. He won the award for the best center at Oregon, so the ability is there. But it's about putting everything together." Max Crosby's praise for JPJ is something every Raiders fan should take notice of. Powers Johnson has been putting in the effort, showing up every morning at 6:15 to work alongside Crosby. That kind of dedication, especially during the grueling offseason, speaks volumes about his character. Crosby even admitted that some mornings Powers Johnson looks at him like he's crazy, but he still shows up. That commitment is exactly what separates good players from great ones. Crosby emphasized that while there's been significant growth, the journey is far from over. There's still a lot of work to do before the season kicks off, and Crosby plans to keep pushing him. But his excitement about Powers Johnson's potential is undeniable. For a player who's already won accolades at Oregon and possesses elite traits like movement, power, and football IQ, the future looks bright. In just a couple of years, Powers Johnson could emerge as one of the Raiders' top players and even a team leader. Crosby's cautious optimism, acknowledging progress but holding off on excessive praise, underscores the high standards he expects. It's a great sign for Powers Johnson, who is clearly on the right track. Switching gears, let's discuss Hunter Renfrow. The former Raiders wide receiver is meeting with the team as part of his attempt to make an NFL comeback. At 29 years old, Renfrow didn't play last season and had shifted his focus toward a career outside of football, reportedly exploring opportunities in finance or sales. However, he wasn't ready to give up on football and is working hard to return to the game. Renfrow's return is inspiring, but his fit with the Raiders isn't guaranteed. While he's exceptional at creating separation underneath, he's not a deep threat or someone who can stretch the field. The Raiders might prioritize other needs, such as finding a true X wide receiver or adding playmakers with more game-changing speed. Roster space is another consideration. With limited spots for wide receivers and players like Jacoby Myers already in the mix, it's difficult to see how Renfrow fits, unless he's willing to come in as a depth option on a reasonable salary. If the Raiders don't move forward with Renfrow, he could find a good fit elsewhere, perhaps with a team like the Panthers, where he's already had a meeting. Regardless of where he ends up, his determination to make a comeback is admirable, and it'll be interesting to see if he gets another shot in the league. That's all for today's update. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.